Hello students, today we're going to learn how to paint a ball using a blended brushstroke technique. To get started, you need to make sure you have water and newspaper handy. You should have your painting surface prepped with an underpainting. You want to have a palette knife and 2 medium round brushes, a piece of cardboard for mixing, and you will need black and white paint today. We want to start out by getting a huge amount of paint. So you want to take your white and scoop out a really nice thick blob of it. As we're working today, we want to mix more paint than we think we need because with blending it's important that you have thick paint and that it's still wet when you start doing your blending. So I have quite a bit of white paint here, cleaning off my palette knife, and then probably about half as much black, so about this much black. Okay, so we're going to get started by working just in our shadow core. So this is the darkest section right through the middle here. The shadow core is not going to be completely black, so I'm going to take about this much black paint and push that to the middle. I'm going to grab just a small amount of white to put in there. So we're aiming for a dark gray. And I want to have extra so that if I need to come back to this later, I'll have it there ready to go. If you don't mix up enough paint, it's going to dry out before you're able to use it. And I'm trying to keep the puddle pushed together in the middle of the palette. That way it's less likely to dry out. So there's my shadow core value. Next up, I want to mix up something slightly lighter than that. That's for my reflected light. That's going to be the area below, right here. So I'm going to take a bit more black, and I'm going to add just a bit more white to it. And I'm aiming for something just a little bit lighter than that. Getting close. Looks like I need to go, oh, that looks pretty good. We'll go with that. Okay, so I have my 2 values here. I'm going to start with my darker value. Take up a nice big scoop of it. You can see how thick that is on the brush. And I'm painting that just across through where my shadow core should go. The paint should be really thick. You don't want it to dry out quickly before you get a chance to blend it into the area that's next to it. Okay, now once I've laid that down, I'm going to then clean the extra paint off my brush. I'm just kind of wiping it on my palette. I'm going to scoop up the lighter paint. This is my reflected light value, and I'm going to paint this just below it. It's just a little bit lighter, so I have a band below that is lighter. Okay, so the next part is the blending part. It's important you don't have too much paint on your brush. So I'm going to take this extra paint and then just wipe it off. I can wipe it off on my newspaper or palette. It doesn't have to be totally off, but just most of it off. And then I'm going to drag it between those 2 areas while both are still wet, and that's going to blend them together. I want to do the same thing above it. So I have my shadow core value here. Reflected light, I want it to get a little bit lighter on the top part, so I'm going to pick more of this lighter value up, drop it just above my shadow core, right up here, and then do the same thing. So clean off my brush and then just drag it between the 2 values. And it looks like my shadow core, it's a little bit lighter than what I intended, so I'm going to get more of my shadow core value and just drag it through there. Sometimes you need to go back and forth to get what you're looking for. And it looks like I'm there. Okay, so I've got my shadow core, reflected light value. Now I want to work on my midtones up here in the transition zone. So to do this, this is why I want to have 2 brushes handy. I'm going to use the other brush for the light area and then keep this for the dark area. So next up, I'm going to mix something that's substantially lighter than this. Cleaning off my palette knife, I'm going to scoop up a really large chunk of white paint and put it over here. I'm just going to grab the teeniest bit of black to put in there. so I get something that's really a light gray. Then using my lighter brush, I'm going to scoop this up and paint this right next to the that middle gray that I just barely did. Some of you may notice that what happens as you're mixing up this lighter color, that the other color next to it, this one down here, this value, has dried out a bit. So I'm going to take that value, and I actually want something in between, so I'm going to grab just a small amount of white and lighten it a bit. And I'm going to place this right in my transition zone, right there. Okay, so now I have two wet values next to each other. I'm going to take the lighter brush, clean off the extra paint, and then drag it between the two values and try to get them to blend. Looks like that worked. It looks like I have a spot right here that's a little too dark. I'm going to switch to my darker brush and see if I can just drag that out a bit. Looks like that worked. Okay, and then really quickly, you don't want to slow down while you're doing this. Then take the lighter color paint, and you're just going to paint the whole or most of the light side of the ball. Like this. I'm kind of running it around in a circle. And then I want to gradually get lighter, so I'm going to take this color that I've mixed up and next to it make it even lighter. So this is almost pure white, not quite there. So I'll start grabbing this and blending it in. So I'm painting next to it, next to the medium mid-tone value, dragging it back into it. And then last would be my highlight. So I'm going to take my light colored brush, clean off the extra paint onto my newspaper, just grab a dollop of pure white, paint it right in the middle, and then just drag it out. You can see you have to, in order for this to work, you have to work really quickly. And if you end up with something where you miss and you need to go back, you may have to go back and take some of your darker values and kind of work back and forth. That's why you want to have plenty of paint mixed up. Next, let's turn our attention to the background. We want to start working dark to light, just like we did with the ball. So we're going to start actually with our cast shadow, which is the darkest area, and then while this is drying, we'll then work with darks from the top and getting gradually lighter until we're white down here at the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to use my darker brush. I'm going to take what I have left of the black, and the cast shadow shouldn't be pitch black, so I'm just going to stir just the teeniest bit of white into it. This should be darker than my shadow core. I'm painting this into the cast shadow area. This isn't going to get blended into the ball. I want to create a nice crisp edge between the cast shadow and the ball. It could be getting a little bit lighter as it moves out, so I'm going to grab the slightly lighter value as I move away from being directly underneath the ball. As you're working, you might be tempted to stay inside of your sketch line, but at this point you really want to paint over the sketch line. You don't really want that to show too much. Okay, so now we're just going to work top to bottom, dark to light. Using the paint I have, I'm just grabbing all of my darks, and I'm just going to lay this down at the top. Then I'm going to grab the next value, which is sort of a medium dark gray, painting that down. I still want to keep this nice and thick. I'm going to paint carefully around the edge of the ball, so I get a nice crisp edge between the two. And it looks like I could use just a little bit more black, so I'm going to grab some with my palette knife. See if I can get more medium in there. There we go. Okay, now I want it to start getting lighter. I'm going to continue using my dark brush, but I want to get something probably in between these two values, so I'm just going to take some of that lighter, the darker, use some of the white I already have handy, get something in between those two. Continue practicing your blending even in the background. And this is the first time we've tried it, so I'm just really mostly grading on effort. I really want to see you try to do this, but I understand that it doesn't always work out the first time. Okay, now I really want to get some lighter values down here at the bottom, so I'm going to switch to my lighter brush, grabbing my medium value over here. I want to paint a nice big thick edge right next to the ball very carefully, and then I'm allowing it to sort of blend up into those upper values. Same thing on the other side. And I can go back and forth, so I can switch to my darker brush, blend it down like that. Switch back to my lighter brush for the bottom. Now I'm just going to pick up this really light value that I have, paint carefully around our cast shadow. Grab a little bit more white to put in there. Okay, getting into this corner, my white paint is a little bit on the dry side, so I'm adding just a touch of water so it flows better. Try to avoid using too much water, but if you find your paints are drying out, you can use a bit. Just using the tip of the brush to get back into that corner, and then pushing out thicker to get a thicker stroke. And I'll probably change the shape a bit too. And there you go.